Hello, 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 and good evening, and thank you for joining us here for our second annual Women's Health Summit. So this has just been a fantastic day. I am so full right now, and as a man, I'm just so full for what we were able to put together here today. We started it off with a skin and hair discussion with Dr. Brooke, and we followed that up with talking about obesity and BMI and all the facts and foolishness that we got to get around the stigma associated with Black women and obesity. Then we talked about HPV and cervical cancer and how that is, if not the most, one of the most preventable cancers out there by just getting that HPV vaccine. So go back, watch that. And then we just finished a fantastic discussion on fibroids and fertility, right? So we talked about how Black women are so significantly impacted by fibroids. And then now we're going to end with with two of my favorite people on this planet that we work with here. Is Dr. Bobby and Dr. Maddox. And we're talking about menopause, right? And so it's something I had no idea, and I've heard about menopause, and we might talk about that a little bit. But this is the Women's Health Summit, so we're not going to talk about that. But we are going to talk about menopause and what it means to you, the physical symptoms, as well as some of the mental kind of challenges that can come along with it, right? Because we know as our body changes, as we all get older, and I'm noticing myself, I can't run as fast as I used to. Knees don't work as much as I used to. That there's a mental component to that when you, especially if you used to be an athlete, and so that's just a small component. So we're talking about menopause and the change for women. What impact does that have on you mentally? So that's why we have Dr. Maddox, and you may recognize Dr. Maddox from her show here on Thursdays called "I'm Not Crazy," but with Dr. Maddox, and then also we have Dr. Bobby, who wrote the book on menopause. And so we're going to talk about that, her book, and really give you all some great information. So before we get to our two special guests, a couple of things I want you to do. Number one, I want you to let us know where you're watching from. Drop your city and state, rep your city in the comment section. We like to know where people are watching us from all over the world. Number two, if you know somebody that needs this information, please tag, share it on your page. We know there's a lot of people, especially that are getting into my demographic, age demographic, are starting to go through the change. And so some people have already started it. Some people are going through the early symptoms, also known as VMS. And so we're going to talk about, so you might want to get this information to help you get through this process. And then finally, if you have any questions that you want to ask, please let us know by dropping in the comment section. So uh, that's it. That's the spiel. We're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to start with you, Dr. Bobby, since you are our resident expert. So, what are some of the common symptoms of menopause, and how do they affect Black women differently?
So, thank you, Ellis, and thank you for allowing me to be here tonight. I am super excited about the topic because menopause eventually will affect all women if you live long enough. So, I've taken an interest in menopause because it's the one thing that I treat that before the patient leaves the office, she is super excited to go to the pharmacy. There's nothing else in my world of OB-GYN that I treat where the patient is breaking her neck when she leaves the office to get to the pharmacy because they're just so excited about the possibilities of feeling better. So, what makes them not feel well? So, during menopause, there is a decrease in hormones, primarily estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. Although there's a decrease in several other hormones, but those are the three primary ones that we as OB-GYNs deal with. So patients will typically complain about 80% of women of hot flashes. And hot flashes are due to a decrease in estrogen, and the patient describes it as about 15 to 30 seconds of just feeling hot. And they may call it their private summer, but typically these symptoms start, or this particular symptom starts around the waist and moves up. And again, it lasts for about 15 to 30 seconds. And I'd say that is the most common symptom that I see in women. A second symptom that I hear quite a bit about is insomnia. And that is primarily due to a decrease in the hormone melatonin. And patients state that they can't sleep as well, they can't fall asleep. And if they are able to fall asleep, they only stay asleep for a short period of time before they have to wake up. And I say the third symptom, besides those two, is vaginal dryness. Due to the decrease in estrogen, the vaginal tissue thins out. And when it thins out, intercourse is much more painful. Patients are more prone to getting vaginal infections, and things just don't feel like they did previous.
Great points.
Look, I'm breaking my own rules. Unmute your mic when you're about to speak. So those three symptoms. It's been a long day, y'all. So those three symptoms again that Dr. Bobby talked about is hot flashes, insomnia, and vaginal dryness. And you said that impacts all women. So there's not any, because we know that in a lot of medical symptoms and a lot of medical conditions, there is a disproportionate impact when it comes to
Mhm,
Black bodies versus others.
mhm.
So are
Yes.
those typically universal, no matter what ethnicity or no matter what ethnic group?
Very good point. What we do know is that Black women tend to go through menopause much sooner, which
Okay.
is huge. There are lots of implications of that because we know that once patients go through menopause, there's decreased estrogen and they are more prone to getting symptoms or diseases such as cardiovascular disease. Heart disease increases drastically once patients go through menopause, as well as osteoporosis.
Mm,
So we know osteoporosis is a disease of the bone where patients begin to have bone thinning, making them more prone to having bone breakage. So this is information that I recently found out was that Black women, since they're going through menopause sooner, they also take longer to go through the transition. So
mm,
wherein Caucasian women may take, oh, a year or two, Black women are transitioning into menopause 4 and 5 years. So
mm.
their symptoms can and often are more pervasive and more extreme.
Mhm.
Wow. Wow. So it starts earlier and lasts longer. So that's
Correct.
what we're talking about
Correct.
in terms of menopausal symptoms for black women. And you named two things that can contribute to a shortening of the lifespan, which is cardiovascular disease, which we know it's either the number one or number two killer of Black women, and then osteoporosis. And one of those things that people don't think about when we're talking about the weakening of our bones is a lot of times quality of life is impacted because of falls, right? And
Correct.
even the deaths. And so you have, my grandmother is a classic example. She fell, broke her hip. Now her life was severely impacted by the loss of mobility and all
Mhm.
of those things that come from that. And so when we're talking about quality of life as Black women, um, that could be severely impacted by starting that menopausal process earlier in life.
Exactly.
Wow. So Dr. Maddox, hearing that, how do you think, like you realizing if, let's say, I'm just going to throw out an arbitrary number, Dr. Bobby, correct me if I'm wrong. So if a Black woman starts going through menopause, let's say earlier, like 45,
Mhm.
50 years old, what kind of mental impact do you think that could have on them, knowing that they may feel that that's a little early for them?
Hmm. One of the points that Dr. Bobby highlighted was the disruption in sleep. Um, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? So as your sleep is disrupted, certainly that also impacts your mood. I think I read recently that women who go through menopause, they're more likely to experience depression. Actually, there is an increase even in the experience of panic attacks around perimenopause, menopausal symptoms. So
Mhm.
the changes in progesterone and estradiol can definitely impact your mood, your anxiety, can be disruptive of your sleep. And there's something about that vaginal dryness that just does not sit well with women, right? And so, when I was young, there is a song by Climax, the men all pause when I walk into a room. That's the only men all pause that I like, right? I don't
Right.
like the menopause piece. So, so there's something that is distinctly unsexy about menopause. Despite what we're seeing with Martha Stewart right now, we do not tend to think sexy and like we want to take up, put on swimsuits and pose for the world when we're in menopause. I mean, even, our weight distribution, the whole shebang, those types of things just change, and it impacts how we see ourselves sometimes, how
Mhm.
sexy we feel, how likely we are to maybe want to be engaged, in those types of things. And so it's really important for us um, to pay attention to that. Now, I can see me, but can you guys see me?
We
Okay.
can.
I
We
can
can.
see
Okay.
you.
Yeah, we can see
Okay.
it. So just keep talking.
Okay.
We're
So
picking up what you're putting down right now.
wonderful. So those types of things, just even can impact our self-esteem because, particularly, the fact that we don't go after treatment quickly. And so
Mhm.
the vaginal dryness can lead to a sexual drought if we're not actually aware of what's happening and realize that there's treatment for that.
So let's talk about some of this because you mentioned some terms, and I mentioned one at the top of the program. So there is menopause, which is the kind of the main topic, but then you mentioned perimenopause, and then I also mentioned those three letters, VMS. So Dr. Bobby, help people kind of understand what those three things are, and what the symptomology is for each one of those things, or and what that means for you, because sometimes we tend in healthcare we tend to use jargon and,
Mhm.
and people don't recognize what those things are, and we just kind of, since we don't know better, we don't ask a question. So let's define those three things: menopause, perimenopause, and VMS.
Very good. So menopause is defined as the complete cessation or ending of a woman's menstrual cycle.
Okay.
And by definition, if a woman has not had a menstrual period in 12 months in 1 year, she is deemed menopausal.
Okay.
So no period for a full 12 months. Wherein perimenopausal means around menopause. And that on average can start around 42, 45. 40 is a little bit young, but I have seen perimenopause in 40-year-olds. So now what does that mean? So that means that there is some ovarian decline. So the ovaries don't function like they used to. They don't make hormones like they used to. They don't ovulate. Patients don't ovulate, releasing the egg to conceive like they used to. So patients secondary to this can start having some symptoms, menopausal symptoms. So the hot flashes, the vaginal dryness, the mood swings, all that can begin as early as 40. Now, typically in perimenopause, the symptoms are not quite as intense, but they are there. They are there. And to Dr. Maddox's point, the brain fog is real. Patients, I forgot to mention that one, but they come in saying they're just not quite as sharp as they used to be. So that can happen as early as 40. So the
Hmm.
whole perimenopausal concept is a real entity, although patients can still conceive during the perimenopause. The oldest I've delivered was 49, and her
Woo.
came out fat and fine and was good, and she was good, but she was definitely perimenopausal. So women during this time period don't ovulate, so fertility numbers start to go down. And if a patient waits later in life to have her children, then this may become a problem for her. And then, VMS is vasomotor symptoms. So that's more of a accumulation of hot flashes, and primarily the hot flashes are included in the vasomotor symptoms.
So in that, are there any treatments that could help? Because we talked about the symptomology, so we know insomnia. We talked about
Mhm.
vaginal dryness. We've talked about mood swings. We've talked about a lot of things. Is there something that can be done to help, you know, lessen the symptoms that are
Mhm.
coming, that are associated with menopause or even perimenopause?
That's for me.
Yes, ma'am.
So absolutely, absolutely. I always start with just basic lifestyle changes. So for example, exercise significantly can reduce menopausal symptoms. Now, exercise is great for almost all of us. However, some patients who have pretty extreme symptoms aren't going to get as much relief as those patients who have milder symptoms. But exercise is a great place to start. Dietary intake. We know that women who consume a lot of sugar tend to have more hot flashes. So we recommend decreasing sugar intake. Now, sugar we know can be horrendous for increasing inflammation, which in turn can increase cancer. So we suggest strongly that patients minimize their sugar intake anyway. And alcohol. A small amount of alcohol on a regular basis is okay, but we also know that larger amounts of alcohol can significantly increase menopausal symptoms. We recommend to our patients lifestyle changes, just simple lifestyle changes, drinking more water, eating more fruits and vegetables, and exercise can be very helpful, especially for that patient who has fewer or milder symptoms. So that's typically where I'll start.
Absolutely. Are there any medications that can be helpful in the reduction?
Absolutely, yes. So another tier is what we call compounded medications. So compounded medications are those medications which are basically individualized for the patient. So one patient may need, let's say, a lot of estrogen, but less progesterone and just a little bit of testosterone. Wherein somebody else may need a little bit of estrogen and a lot of progesterone and just a little bit of testosterone. So, how do we know how much each patient needs? Well, what we can do now is we can draw blood or we can test saliva and we can check hormone levels. And then, based upon the patient's hormone levels, and based upon her symptoms, we can prescribe a medication program which is individualized and geared toward her. And then, thirdly, is the more traditional approach. The traditional approach is what we've been accustomed to for many years. You go to the physician, you get a prescription. The prescription is for X, Y, and Z. You take it to the pharmacist, and that one is not tailor made. That one is much more non specific. But for some patients, that does work well.
Absolutely. So Dr. Maddox, you're hearing all of this stuff. What are you thinking about from a mental health standpoint? That now you're talking about a woman that has now transitioned to, hey, I'm no longer able to procreate, which
Mhm.
many people, it says that's the defining factor of being a woman, right? It's saying, hey, I have the ability to create life in my
Mhm.
body, and now menopause shuts that down. How do you think somebody will experience that, and what are some things that they can do to help kind of get over that could be feelings of loss?
Mhm. Oh, that is an excellent question. And before I get to it, I want to say what Dr. Bobby said is also important in terms of improving your mood and reducing anxiety. So, changing your diet,
Mhm.
addressing your nutrition, addressing the exercise, those are things that will also help with mood and reducing your anxiety. If I understand your question correctly, I will say that it's interesting because I think I've been having these conversations um, around women who are physicians who have elected to not have children until later, or who have elected not to have children, period. And many times there is a little bit of regret, because I think we frequently think the grass is greener on the other side. And so the women who have children are like, oh my gosh, I can't wait till these kids are out of the house. And then the people who don't have children are thinking, I want to have children. And so there can be some regret. I think we are living in a time. This is a fortunate time to be living in and not have children, because there's not as much burden, and there's not the spiritual notions of you're cursed if you don't have children, which women used to have to engage and and kind of address. And then there are also other opportunities. So I think processing what is important to you and why you've made those choices, and then making peace with it. And then I tell people sometimes you don't have to make peace with it. I mean, we have all kinds of things happening in fertility now. I mean, I encourage my patients who are on the long path to careers and doing a lot of training to freeze their eggs now. I mean, I'm having conversations that I would not have been having 20 years ago, but we have options in terms of freezing your eggs, fertility, the whole shebang. And those are things that you can still, you can still adopt. I'm just having these conversations, and realizing that just because it doesn't come one way doesn't mean it can't come another.
Mhm.
Did I answer your question, Ellis?
It did. It did. It did. You're bringing up a great point in terms of how technology and modern medicine has really helped with that process, right? So, like you're right, women before being able to freeze your eggs, once you hit menopause, that was pretty much it. But now you can freeze your eggs, and you're right, Tasha. It is an expensive process, but it is available to you in order to be able to delay that process. Or I know people that said at the time that they didn't want children in the moment, but they might want them someday, so they chose to freeze their eggs to have that option to have a biological child. So, Dr. Bobby, the question comes into how is menopause diagnosed by the OB/GYN, or is it pretty much based on what that patient is reporting to you when they're coming in for their annual checkup?
So, there is a blood test that we can use called FSH, which is helpful in making the diagnosis. But typically, I'll make the diagnosis based upon a patient's symptoms, based upon her history. And if she tells me she hasn't had a period in a year, then that's a red flag that she's menopausal. And I use the FSH more as a supplement. But based upon her symptoms and based upon her history is the best way to diagnose menopause.
Okay.
And it's interesting because now they're talking about the length of time that it sometimes takes Black women before they're actually diagnosed accurately. And even once they're diagnosed, that they may not get the treatment that is available to them. And I know that's fairly new, probably in the last year that I've become familiar with it. I think I've only become familiar with it actually in the last 6 months or so. So I'm not sure how widespread that is, but I think the not getting diagnosed and not getting treated, and then sometimes the stigma of people thinking, oh, she's crazy because she's in menopause, because there are all these stigmatizing beliefs about women going crazy during menopause, that I will say is grounded in some, yes, you can have depression, yes, you can have anxiety, but you should not have to carry that burden of, oh, they're going to think I'm crazy because I'm going through menopause, because that's just not true.
Mhm. Yeah, there are a lot of stigmas associated in our community just about going through menopause. And so we
Mhm.
don't talk about it like the Caucasian counterparts.
Mhm.
Absolutely. There's a good question that came in from YouTube from Carrie Ann. She's saying, how do you tell if you're in menopause if you have had an endometrial ablation?
Mhm. Good question. So, Carrie Ann, you're correct in saying that since you're not having periods or your periods are lighter, secondary to the ablation, you can't really use bleeding as a sign. So you have to look for other things, such as hot flashes, vaginal dryness, the insomnia, and the mood swings. Those are pretty common. And since you can't use bleeding as your guide, you just have to look for something else. And then, of course, your age.
Right.
Those hot flashes are a telltale sign. You know,
Mhm.
we've gone from, hot girl to hot girl.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Bobby, didn't you write a book about this? I want you to share your book, the name of your book.
I did. My book is called A Hot Mess: Tips, Tricks, and Truths for Menopause and Perimenopause.
I love it. Okay, wait a minute. You have to put that on the screen. We got it.
Yes,
I want that book.
I will put that
I,
on the
it
screen.
resonates with my whole soul. Okay.
Yep, yep. And I was number one bestseller on Amazon.
So it's
Yeah.
called a
So
hot
basically
mess
what she's
tips.
saying is that we are in the midst of greatness. We have a celebrity in our midst right now, number one bestseller, and the hot mess. I love it. Dr. Bobby, what's your last name? We got to make sure we got the right person, the right
It's
book.
Hannah, Hannah. I'll put that in the chat. Hannah.
A
I don't know
hot
about being a
mess.
celebrity, Dr. Maddox. I don't know about all that. Okay. There we go. Oh,
Okay, so look, yes. So I'm gonna copy this, and then I am going to put this um, in the comments so our folks can know the name of your book and go get that book. It's on. You heard she said it was a bestseller, so I'm sure if you start typing it, it's gonna pop up. Okay.
Yeah.
And I didn't even forget to look. Dr. Bobby is so modest she didn't put her last name on there. But yeah, Dr. Bobby Hannah is her name.
uh-huh.
And so you could check that out. But it's called A Hot Mess: Tip, Tricks, Truths about Menopause and Perimenopause.
Mhm.
So please, that book there will help you serve as a guide for you as you're going through this process. So, um, being in this space, I typically am frustrated by healthcare, right? And that's why we have you all on here to stand in the gap, right? To be that voice, to be that translator, because healthcare can be at times dismissive and at times abusive of Black women in general.
Mhm.
So, how do we help the women that are watching this program, the women that will watch this program? How do we help them become better advocates for themselves as they're approaching menopause or start to have those perimenopause symptoms?
Now,
Dr.
don't you
Bobby,
tell anybody I said this, okay?
go ahead.
Because
Yes.
I rarely encourage people to use Dr. Google. Really, I rarely do.
Okay. All right.
But I think because this is something that people are so uncomfortable talking about in our circles that we may be okay saying I'm flashing, but generally overall we're not necessarily comfortable speaking openly about this. And I think the first thing is in the circles that you're in with the people that you feel safe with who have taken this journey before, have those conversations with them because it helps to find out that you're not alone in this journey.
Mhm.
The other piece is, there's some things that you may not feel comfortable talking with them about. You may not feel comfortable talking with them about vaginal dryness, depending on your philosophy or your background in life. And so having a starting point if you use Google so that you know what to talk to your doctor about is really important. I am, by virtue of what I do, I talk about sex a lot in my practice because some of my medications can really decrease your drive. So it's fairly common for me to ask about your sex life. And I realize many doctors may not do that. But I started out asking men a lot about decreased ability to perform and that kind of thing. But as I have progressed in this journey, I frequently ask women about their libido, about their sex drive, their interest, their desire, their ability, because many times people talk about interest, but they don't talk about vaginal dryness. And if you are dealing with someone who's not comfortable and you don't initiate that conversation, you put them in the middle of a sex drought in what should be the prime of their life. The kids are gone. They are empty nesters. They can run around butt naked if they want to, right? But they're not doing it because they're uncomfortable having these conversations. And so I think of myself as a person who brings your smiles, your sleep, and your sex back.
All right now. I love it.
That is fantastic.
I
Dr.
love it.
Bobby, I mean, you hear Dr. Maddox talk about it. So, how do we get, you know, continue that question? How do we get women the information that they need to be able to have those conversations with their healthcare providers? And I like the fact that we're talking about having those conversations with our circle, right? And so that circle that we have that conversation with might be smaller, right? Because
Mhm.
it's for some reason it's easier to talk about hypertension than it is to talk about menopause, right? And so we know
Right,
that
right.
there's conditions that it's easier to talk about than other conditions. And so
Hmm.
how do we normalize it to a degree to where we're talking about it, and then arm women with the proper, correct information to where they can have a real conversation with their healthcare provider.
So I think a seminar like this with BDO, this is a great place to start because patients can look at this from the privacy of their own home,
Yeah.
and they don't have to talk about it with anybody if they're not comfortable talking about it. And just like Dr. Maddox said, it's a real part of life. And if they're not quite comfortable speaking to a physician, then speak to your girlfriends and then share and listen to what they have to say about it. Share your story, let them share their story, and then realize that we as physicians have heard everything. There's just absolutely nothing we haven't heard. So feel free to find someone. And if the person that you have as a provider is not addressing your needs, then, like she said, you have to go on Google and find those people who specialize in
Mhm.
menopause. Who can help me along this journey? Because not all OB-GYNs are comfortable with, let's say, for example, compounding drugs. There are compounded drugs. They're much more comfortable with the traditional medicine and less comfortable with compounding drugs. And compounded drugs give patients a completely different option because they are made of bioidentical hormones, hormones which are just like what their ovaries were making. So,
So help people understand the difference between traditional and compounding drugs.
okay, so the compounded drugs are made by a compounding pharmacy. So
Okay.
you can't go to Walgreens, you can't go to CVS to get those in general.
Right.
And those are custom made for the patient. So the physician writes a prescription based upon the patient's symptoms and based upon her lab results, and then submits that to the compounding pharmacy. Wherein the traditional meds are already made up and they're less individualized. Now, the compounded meds are not FDA approved. Collectively, they are. For example, the estrogen that they come from collectively is approved. But once you get some estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone in a different formulation, that has not been FDA approved. But I feel that they're safer because they are plant based as opposed to those other ones, which can be, not all of them, but they can be animal based.
Well, you said a
Great
word right
point.
there. I'm glad I asked a question. Okay, so now we know. Hey, it's custom made for you, right? So it's
Correct.
individual.
Correct.
It's plant based,
Plant based.
and even though it's not FDA approved, the products that are part of the compounding medications are individually approved, but just not in the combination that you have written in terms of the prescription for that particular patient. That combination is not necessarily FDA approved.
I couldn't have said it any better, Ellis.
I'm getting it as I'm losing my voice. But so, Dr. Maddox, you hear you can have something custom made for you. You hear that you're talking about talking to your friends and creating safe spaces. How does that help someone move from the anxiety and depression into a place of acceptance?
Mm. I think say our tribe is so important when we're doing this, because the safe place is where you have an opportunity to hear that you're not alone, that that other people have navigated this, and to some of the get some of the benefit of their wisdom of having to go through this. The other piece I think is that's really important, because as you are navigating menopause, you're navigating some other stressful roles. You're becoming an empty nester. Perhaps your children are leaving. The children are graduating. Maybe your friends and family are passing on, transitioning, dying. Um, you are retiring, you're doing these different things. And so these stressors that you're having to accommodate and acclimate to are happening while your body is changing, while your hormones are changing. And so as the psychiatrist in the room, I have to go where I always go, and that is get yourself therapy and a coach, depending on the situation. I think of coaches as short term, goal oriented fixes, maybe 3 to 6 months, and that's not related to mood or anxiety, but related to navigating different things sometimes. But navigating those with someone who is trained and experienced, because when you talk to your friends, you have the benefit of one person's experience. And I call that anecdotal evidence. And sometimes that may work for you, but sometimes it may not, because what your friends may not have going on is maybe they don't have thyroid abnormalities, or maybe they've not been, you know, something has not happened to them that has happened to you. So you get the benefit of the experience, of the experience and the training of the mental health provider, and you get a safe place that is confidential. And I always say confidential because you know um, there's some things that you may want to share about what's happening in the privacy of your bedroom that your husband may not feel, or your partner, excuse me, may not feel comfortable with you sharing with your girlfriends. They don't want to walk in and hear you telling Boquisha about what's going on with them. You know?
Mhm.
But it's important for you to have a safe place to share.
Agreed.
That's fantastic, right? So you have to kind of use some judgment, right? Use some discernment, as they say in the Bible. You got to use a
Mhm.
little discernment. Just for the record, I was taught that was the only spiritual gift we should be praying for is discernment. So we need to have a little discernment in terms of who you share this with and how you share it. But still, I think ultimately what we're talking about is having somebody to talk to, whether it is a paid professional counselor, whether it's your best friend, um, a small group of girlfriends that you've been friends for a long time, and y'all can have those kind of conversations. But ultimately, that burden becomes shared, right? And so that's what we're really talking about is, and when you share those burdens, that's when you kind of release some of the anxiety. Dr. Bobby, in the releasing of that kind of sharing that burden that comes with the change that we all kind of go through as we age,
Mhm.
um, does that seem to have an impact on the symptomology that's reported?
Um, I think so. Yes, it does. Because what we allow patients to do when they come into the office to just express themselves, they feel better at that first visit. because they say, I just wanted to get this off my chest. I just wanted to share my symptoms because I've been thinking I was crazy, doc.
Mm-hmm.
Thought this was all in my head. Or maybe they have seen a provider previously who said, yeah, kind of poo-pooed them. Yeah, this is all in your head. So just sharing it with a provider can be very helpful for patients, even before you take that first step. So just talking about it and realizing that it's a normal process of life, and having the kind of provider who makes you feel comfortable sharing it is huge. And then, of course, the added bonus is being able to treat it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, you create a network, right? So when you have that hot flash and when you're not sharing with anybody,
Mhm.
tendency is to want to hide, right? And so we know, as Dr. Manis could tell you, when we start hiding things, that's when we start building up our anxiety, right? So we start become more anxious. We have to leave the room. We start avoiding areas, situations, going out with groups because you may have that hot flash. You might be irritable. You might all of these things. We start avoiding
Mhm.
intimacy with our partners because
Mhm.
of vaginal dryness, and so all of those things can lead to more anxiety, right? And so it's almost like that. It's the chicken or the egg, and so it starts to spin itself out, and you don't know what started, but you really start to isolate, and ultimately we know that isolation from our social settings, from our groups, from our work, from anything, isolation is not good for our mental health. And so,
Right.
Dr. Maddox, what are your thoughts about that? Am I on the right path?
Well, I would definitely say it's interesting because there's certain parts that we're comfortable talking about. Like people are, I'm telling you, my husband wants me to think I'm crazy at times when I say, "Oh my gosh, it's hot in here." It's not hot in here. Yes, it is hot in here. And then someone else comes in the room and they're like, "It is hot." So, so you got to have a good circle around you who will not feed into you're going through some things, right?
Right,
But
right,
we're comfortable talking about the flashing. We're comfortable talking about changing the thermostat and that kind of stuff. But I would really say, well, we may not be comfortable shouting it from the rooftop at church, but there are some people that perhaps you have a relationship with, and it can just start with your primary care doc. And if you are not comfortable talking to your primary care doctor about this, I dare say you should consider getting a different primary care doc because you're going to have to, there's so many very sensitive issues that you will talk to. And I don't know if it's that your primary care doc is not the right fit for you or if you're just entirely too shy. But if you are shy, push through, write
Mhm.
it down. If you're
Yeah.
not comfortable having it one-on-one, use the patient portal and send them the question. What do I do? I'm struggling in the bedroom. I need some help with vaginal dryness. And
Mhm.
you can have that through the patient portal and the nurse call you back and give you the answer. Or they send you something. But having that conversation with your primary care provider is essential because they will ideally be up. And I say primary care provider, really what I need to be saying is your OB doc. Okay.
mhm,
Your OB doc, this is what they do all day, every day. This is their bread and butter. So have it with them. Have it with your primary care doc if you don't have an OB. But then ask your primary care doc to refer you to someone. And if you are a Black woman, it is okay to ask your insurance provider what Black OB docs are accepting new patients.
Mhm.
It's okay to talk to the people at church and say, who do you see? We have Facebook now. You can put it on a Facebook post.
Mhm.
Any Black OB docs in the community, and they will tell you who they are. So please, please, please understand you are not alone.
Mhm.
Have not traveled this journey yet, but courtesy of Dr. Bobby, I feel much more well informed, you know, when I do. And I want to, can I ask a question, Dr. Bobby? I want to know about these flashes. Now, I might not have walked the whole journey, but can
Mhm.
you give us can you give the generic recommendations for flashing and how to overcome that? Nutrition, over the counter products, what have you. We'll take whatever. And I'm asking on behalf of all the women who are listening and who shall watch at some point.
So over the counter, absolutely. I forgot to mention this, but there is a product called hyaluronic acid, and it's not new. We've been using it for eons on our skin. So it's a moisturizer. So
Right.
it adds moisture to the body. So lately, this has been manufactured for the vagina, for vaginal dryness. And my patients really like it. Now, again, there's no prescription, there are no parabens, there are no hormones. You just go online, and the company that I use, and I know there is more than one company, but the one that I like is called Bonafide. So Bonafide. That's the name of the company. And the product is called Reverie.
Okay. Yeah, I've heard of
Uh,
that.
Reverie. And it's a little vaginal rocket made of hyaluronic acid that is inserted into the vagina at bedtime 2 to 3 times a week. And what it does is it just adds moisture to the vagina. Now, the good thing about it is that you don't have to worry about having breast cancer. Patients are concerned sometimes with estrogen and breast cancer. It has no estrogen in it. So anybody could use it. Even let's say a 20-year-old young woman who's on birth control pills may have vaginal dryness due to that. So any person or any female with vaginal dryness, whatever the reason, can use this hyaluronic acid. The downside, though, is when you stop using it, the vaginal dryness will recur.
Okay.
But
I'm
it's
glad that's the only downside because I was thinking this sounds too good to be true. I'm glad that's the only downside that you
yeah,
were.
yeah, yeah. And you can just get it like you said. You order it, go online, and they deliver it right to your home.
Now, ladies, what she said was the company is Bonafide,
Mhm.
the product is hyaluronic acid, and it's by
The
um,
company is called Bonafide.
Bonafide.
Yep,
Okay.
And
called
the product is
Reverie.
Reverie. Reverie
Yep,
is the name.
Revaree.
Now, Dr. Bobby just dropped a nugget that was worth you being on here. You all need to send her a love offering because this is something that let the church say amen and send Dr.
Right.
Bobby a love
We, we,
offering.
we're gonna put Dr. Bobby's cash app. We in the modern church now. We do electronic.
Oh,
We do
that's
Yes,
sweet.
electronic
That's
fast.
sweet.
yes.
Mhm.
So there's a question that's coming in from the from YouTube, and she's saying my hot flashes cause nausea. Ginger does not help. Any suggestions for me?
Suggestions for the nausea. Is that what she's looking for? Suggestions for the nausea?
Suggestions for the
Or
nausea. She said ginger is not helping with the nausea when
okay.
she gets a hot flash.
I would consider treating the hot flash first so then she doesn't get the nausea. Is
Okay.
she, is she willing to take medication? And another thing, Bonafide makes a product, not just Reverie for the vaginal dryness. They make Relazin and Restella for hot flashes and libido.
Okay.
So if a patient is not interested in any hormones, compounded, traditional, then something like a Bonafide product. It takes a couple of months before the patient actually starts to feel better. But with the Reverie and the Restella, but it happens. They typically feel much better.
It's good.
That's great. I mean, well, y'all, Bonafide just got a commercial. So,
Yeah, they did. Yeah.
so as we're wrapping up here, talking on the final panel on our Women's Health Summit, I'm going to ask a question that it wasn't on the initial list, but I'm just speaking because I'm a married man, and we get into a certain age, and what I've noticed is when somebody's hot and they start changing the thermostat, I just put on some socks and some sweatpants and keep it moving. So, how can men be more supportive of their partners if when they're if they start to go through this process? How can we be more supportive?
Let me answer that, Dr. Bob. Let me get started. Somebody tell my husband to turn the TV on because I want him to hear this. Okay. so, so first of all, when we have the mental fog and we are forgetting stuff, don't amplify that we have that you have told us this 17 times already. Don't tell us that. In the time it took you to say, I told you this 17 times, you could have answered my question already. So don't make us feel bad for the brain fog and the memory impairment that we have. Number one. Number two, when we are flashing, do just like what Ellis talked about. Go get your socks, go get your blanket, and don't amplify that we are flashing. Just let us believe is normal weather. Okay. Do what my brother did. In December, when my sister-in-law was pregnant and turned the thermostat up, he had a blanket and a coat on and didn't say a word. Do that. Follow those examples, okay? Um, and then number three, when she tells you that she is craving something that sounds ridiculous, pickles and and peppermint, whatever it is, just go get it. Don't offer commentary on it. Just go get it. Now, I have to tell you, these are really not comments for the men. These are comments for my husband. Somebody get these comments to him. I left out something. I'll circle back if I did.
I'll clip it out for you, so that way all you just playing that part. You don't have to watch the whole program. You just watch that part.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Bobby, any other advice for partners? And I want to make it more, heterosexual partners to
Yeah.
help their partner go through uh, this process.
So I think what you just said, Ellis, is huge. Just being willing to listen. So you want to help your wife, you want to be there. So just lending a listening ear and acknowledging what she's going through. Now, you may not know all the symptoms or the treatment, but you know that something is different. She didn't do this 5 years ago or 10 years ago.
Right.
Just acknowledge it. I mean, that's just huge. Just saying, honey, I've noticed X, Y, and Z. Is there anything I can do to help? Or if she brings it up to you and says, this is this way, or this is not like it used to be, just say, yeah, I understand. Can you tell me about it? Be willing to just listen. You don't
Mm.
have to come in with solutions. Just be willing to listen. That's all she's looking for, is a listening ear and someone to acknowledge what she's going through.
It's called validation, folks. That's all it is. You just make it. You're validating their experience,
Mm-hmm.
and by doing that, you could do so much. Not only in terms of making them feel better about what they're going through, but also it could help improve your relationship by
Yeah.
validating their experience. And then we could expand that out to a whole nother thing about validating experiences
Mm-hmm.
in this country.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm
Mm-hmm.
talking. All right, but that's a whole other show, and that's not what we're here to talk about today. So I just want to say this was a joy. This was the best way to end our Women's Health Summit. We wanted to, and Francesca, she put a comment in. She said, "And to think, I used to look forward to menopause. It's still okay, right? It's still okay. I promise you, it's gonna be okay. You just got some tools I put them in there. What Dr. Bobby said. So go to Bonafide. You got some things. If you want to go see Dr. Bobby, she's in Michigan. But if you need to go up there and she can compound a medication for you, do that too. And there are
Mm-hmm.
other pharmaceutical companies that are coming out with general medication.
Yes. Yes.
They're coming out with some medications that will help with those VMS symptoms that we
Mm-hmm.
talked about earlier in the program. And so there is hope out there. Get Dr. Bobby's book, A Hot Mess. I put the title of the book into the comments as well. So go get that book, and it'll help really any ways that we can continue to expand and learn about what our bodies are going through, the better chance we have of overcoming it and at least having a better experience as we're going through these things. And so I just want to thank Dr. Bobby, thank Dr. Maddox. Catch Dr. Maddox every Thursday here on blackdoctor.org with her show, I'm Not Crazy But. And she has a fantastic, it's just a fun show. I've been a guest a couple of times, and it's just a fun show to really kind of talk about mental health. And we've got to talk about it in a way that it becomes that conversation is becoming normalized, right? And so, but again, go back if you missed any of the other programs, go back and watch them. I encourage you to go back and watch them. Look, have a watch party with your girlfriends, right? Pick a show, sit down with your glass of wine, friends, y'all could and just watch the program because there's such great information. Whether you're dealing with menopause, whether you're dealing with fibroids, whether you're talking about getting screened for cervical cancer, those three alone. If you're dealing with being overweight and that stigma of obesity, of that diagnosis, all of that has been covered. We talked about what you should be doing with your skin and hair and how the dermatologist plays a role in that whole process. So you just can't be out there fishing, shooting in the dark, buying products. Go see your dermatologist and get that designation. And then that's just the tip of the iceberg of all the information that we shared with you all today. So I wanted to just say thank you all so much for being gracious and watching, staying with us all the way to the end. I'm I'm done. I'm spent.
But
We
Alice,
need to
I
take
need to tell
tomorrow
them,
off.
you guys, all doctors are not created the same. I did not know probably at least a quarter to a third of what Dr. Bobby was saying. You need to get her book, A Hot Mess, Tips, Tricks, and Truths About Menopause and Perimenopause. This
Yeah,
is my first time meeting Dr. Bobby. I'm not her publicist, but I'm going to tell you that a whole lot of doctors don't know what she told you tonight. And so you might not be able to go to your primary care doc and ask. Get that book if you're going through the change or you know somebody who's going through the change. This is a book you need to get.
Thank you, Dr. Maddox. I appreciate you. And
absolutely.
I'm gonna tune into your show tomorrow night, or did you say Thursday or Wednesday?
Thursday from 11 to 12 Central Standard Time. I don't know if are you Eastern?
Detroit's Eastern.
Okay, 12 to 1 on Thursdays. And then Ellis is going to connect us because you got to come on my show and tell my folks what you just told all these people.
Yeah,
I would love to. I would love to.
and Dr. Bobby and I, we're gonna get her on Black Doctor on a more regular basis because this is something, especially with our audience being, predominantly women and predominantly women in that space where they start thinking about, that change, right?
Mhm.
That 35 to 55 range where the clock starts ticking, right? And especially now we learned tonight from Dr. Bobby that black women start experiencing it earlier and might go through it longer. So now you're talking about longer hot flashes, longer insomnia. That can impact your mood, that can impact your relationships, your overall well-being, how you see yourself, your self-esteem. So all of these things can be impacted. And if you just read the book, and talk to Dr. Bobby, you can help get through this process and get those tips and techniques. And so, just really, really want to thank you all again for joining us. And
I
we will
was
see
about to
you.
say one more thing.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I'm just hoping that women come to embrace this time in their lives
Mm,
and not to dread it. This dread that we have in this society is not coming from our foremothers in Africa,
mm,
because there they appreciate it, they applaud it. You don't have to worry about any more sanitary protection. You're done having your babies. You don't have to worry about getting pregnant. And they have learned to embrace menopause in
mm.
many countries in Africa. So where we get this stigma from in our country, I don't know. But this is not what our foremothers and our current mothers in Africa are doing or talking about.
We value youth more than experience and elderly here in this country, and so
True that.
and being able to get pregnant is a sign of youth. And so,
Yeah.
you're right. Our ancestors did pay a lot more homage to being older and
Mhm.
elderly. Gave
The
them
wisdom is huge there.
deference and respect to so
Yes.
lived a long life. And so
Yes.
you're absolutely right. And we've got to do better in our community. So I don't, what
Mhm.
America does is what America does. But I'm talking about in our community, we need
Mhm.
to understand that when somebody has reached a certain age, there's some wisdom that's been collected along the way. And we need to listen to that and pay respect to that. So
Mhm.
I
Yep.
that word right there, that'll preach, as they say in the church.
Mhm.
So again, thank you all, and we'll be back tomorrow. We got some great programs tomorrow. We got Ricky Fairley talking about breast cancer, her weekly show on breast cancer. We're going to be talking about skin cancer. It's Skin Cancer Awareness Month. So we've got a show about skin cancer as well. So it doesn't stop here on BDL. We're going to get you all the health and wellness information that you need so you can be the healthiest that you can be. And with that, I'll say good night.
Good night.